our discussion we've just completed, you know, Carl is sort of a CEO from the maker movement. You know, he's a, sit down somewhere. Carl is CEO of Autodesk, and this is a company that really is taking some very creative moves in terms of rethinking what the future of society ought to be and how software, the role that software can play in the future of society. And I want to make sure we get time for the audience to ask you some questions too, but talk about what, well, let me just get my right question. Oh, I know what I wanted to start by asking you. We're going to get to a lot of things because Autodesk does so many things.
Are you sure?
Yeah, I'm pretty sure knowing you. You know, for anybody who was at the reception last night, one of the things that was really striking to me, especially for a reception sponsored by a big tech company, there was a sense of play that was really pronounced. Making fuzzy dice and, you know, air fresheners and racing zucchinis. And I found it, after the fact, I was thinking about it, what an interesting thing it was. And in my career as a business journalist, you know, over the last 30, 35 years, unfortunately, you know, 35 years ago, you would never have gone to a corporate event that had that stuff happen. And I guess what I really wanted to ask you is, because you have a sense of play. I mean, you're very involved in making things yourself and not letting the company and the world forget that it's not just, it's that from the CEO on down, we're makers, we're here to have a good time and we're here to make progress. I don't know where the question is in that, but it seems like there's a cultural thing that you have really tried to build at Autodesk under your leadership that is kind of magical, to be honest.
Well, thanks. You know, the interesting thing is, if you think about all of our customers, they make stuff.
Yeah.
So they're making automobiles, they're making medical devices, they're building buildings, they're building civic infrastructure. And at heart, it's all about taking some idea and turning it into something.
Yeah.
And, you know, there's a fun of it. One of the things I was marveling at, you know, during that wonderful panel on cities, is in some ways, while the issues we deal with are technically really complex, they're easy compared to cities.
Yeah.
You know, we don't have all those people to deal with. I mean, there's so many difficult issues that you wrestle with in a city. You know, the problems we deal with are ones of design and engineering and, you know, while technically very complicated, they do have some simplicity to it. But when you go back, what we're really trying to do is help all these people who at heart are really trying to take their ideas and turn it into things that solve problems.
Yeah. Well, it would probably be worth you just quickly describing what Autodesk does and, you know, why you're interested in the maker movement and all this stuff. I think some people here may not know the range of products.
Yeah, I mean, so really, what we do fundamentally is we make software. And it's design and engineering software for people who build infrastructure and buildings, for people who build manufactured products like cars and airplanes. And the part that many people don't know is we make software for people who make movies and video games. So we're in the business of making design, engineering, animation software. That's what our business is. And you know, when I think of the maker movement, I think the maker movement is just, you know, the tip. I think the maker movement's incredibly interesting. But I also think when you start moving up the ladder in terms of scale, so maker's great and it's mostly individual and it's about all of us in our home lives, personal lives. But then you look at what's going up in the startup community, and now you look at hardware startups, all the way up to the largest manufacturers in the world. And in essence, many of the challenges they share are the same.
Yeah.
It is this idea of how do I get my idea made? How do I do it quicker?
It's even making a better city, for that matter.
Absolutely.
Right.
It's just a different scale problem.
Yeah.
And you know, so it's this idea of how do I turn this into a real thing? And you know, for many companies, it's how do I make it in a way that's differentiated from the next?
Right.
You know, and Disney is as interested in making a different movie from someone as GM is in making a different car than BMW. And so we're there as the tool providers for that. And really, you know, in some ways, the best part of my job is to work with all these wonderfully creative, imaginative people who are trying to get this done. And, you know, there's a special relationship between a tool maker and the people who are trying to get the, you know, I sometimes think of, you know, the samurai sword maker and the samurai. each one depends on the other in the same way as the tool maker for most of the, creative engineering community. That's kind of a special role we have.
It is a special role. I mean, you started sort of with architectural software, wasn't that what was the first thing?
The first thing that we got best known for is this thing called AutoCAD. And it was to draft on a computer.
Yeah, drafting, yeah.
Yeah. As a matter of fact.
That was what, about 25 years ago?
Almost 30 years ago. A company started at the same time as Microsoft and Adobe. As a matter of fact, we got stuck with the name Autodesk because the idea was at the time they were going to build a suite of applications that looked like Microsoft Office. So we're still called Autodesk, and there's Daniel talking about Microsoft.
Oh, well.
They got that a little bit wrong, but otherwise it's okay.
Well, there's so many things that Autodesk does that I find fascinating. One of the things, though, that I think this audience might find striking, although I want to talk about anything that you think is relevant to Detroit and civic innovation and the future of business and society, but you said at one recent conversation, the future is biological. And you're very interested in Autodesk in what's happening with synthetic biology and genomics, which is not intuitive. A lot of people might think, wait, this is a company that's helping architects and people designing cars. Why biology? What interests you about biology so much right now?
So I think there's a couple things going on, and I'd say synthetic biology and kind of building at the nanoscale, I think is one of the big next frontiers. So I'm interested in exploring places where we can take the knowledge we have from how do we design in the inert world, the stuff that's all around us, and how do we apply it to biological stuff. If you look at, so let's give some examples of biological, because I think the future of manufacturing is going to have a large component which is biological. So we're shipping a 3D printer right now. The packaging for that is all mycelium. It's all mushroom.
Mushrooms.
You put mushrooms
Instead of styrofoam peanuts.
Absolutely. And then when you get this thing, you take out your printer and you take the mycelium and the box, and it's all compostable.
Compostable, wow.
Right. You just
That's
take
better than recyclable.
Yeah, it's perfect. So you look at something like that. There's been many companies that are able to make jet fuel from algae. So when you start thinking of the scale of problems, you have to come up with solutions that scale equally well. So, for example, in the news and certainly in the maker movement, there's a huge amount of talk about things like 3D printing.
Right.
3D printing has one terrible problem, is that it's fighting the power of three. And what I mean by that is if you have something that you 3D printed and you wanted to make it twice as big, it takes 8 times as long. And if you want to, and so it scales by
exponentially up. So
you
making
have to
really big things is super hard.
Super hard. So you got to look for things that scale exponentially as well. Biology is one of those. I'll tell you one other biological thing. We're working with a group, George Church and a bunch of researchers at Harvard. They're building nanoscale robots that deliver payloaded drugs inside the body. So imagine putting something in, it targets a particular cell. When it reaches, it opens and delivers a payload locally.
So what is Autodesk doing with them?
In order to design these things, you need software. So that was an example where we looked and we said, we understand some of these ideas of how to design and engineer things, and you need tools in order to do this. So if you're going to design a nanoscale robot, if you're going to, in this case, it's made out of strands of DNA that self-assemble, you need tools to figure out what that thing's going to look like, how it's going to operate. At a nanoscale, it has hinges. It has many of the things mechanical components in the real world have. So, when you tie it back to things like cities, I mean, my interest is, we have 2 trends that are going on. One that I'm terribly afraid of, which is, what are we all going to do when the robots take our jobs? There is, we look and we will see autonomous vehicles. There's a number of things that will make having a healthy, robust middle class around the world difficult. On the other hand, the way we've stayed ahead of this is by developing new opportunities. And I think we have to look at those opportunities, the entrepreneurial opportunities where we can go and find new industries where there are problems that need to be solved. And we know there's no shortage of problems. I look at biological things as one of the ways to do it. But even when I look at the maker movement, hardware startups, for me, it's how do we take all the ingenuity and how do we turn it around so people get good jobs? How do they, make healthy communities as a result of building good businesses?
So you come down sort of in the middle on this dystopian versus optimistic point of view. I mean,
I'm a New Yorker, I'm not Danish.
yeah. So wait, that means what New Yorkers aren't in the middle of anything. What are you talking about?
Exactly.
So, but how worried are you about this jobs thing? I mean, we factories are increasingly automated, right?
Yeah.
Detroit's maybe going to, get back to auto industry in its full blossom, but that there will never be the jobs before, right?
Right. So my thing is, if you look at Detroit or any of the industrialized cities as being about the factory, that's the mistake.
Yeah.
That was a means of production, it was an appropriate one at the time. You're right. Factories are tiny. You go to the plants around here, they're almost all completely automated. The parking lots, when they're still running 3 shifts, you go outside and the parking lot has 20% of the cars in it, did it when it was at its peak. We're not going to create those kind of jobs. The question is, can we create other and even better jobs? And what I think the strength of places like Detroit is the expertise of the people. In some ways, I think it's crazy. My adopted home in San Francisco, where they're talking about hardware startups. You go to a meetup and there's 1,000 companies that are building hardware.
Hardware, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, physical
That's
products.
anything, yeah.
But you look here and you go, this is where the expertise is.
Yeah.
So some days I feel like we're all pretending in San Francisco that we know how to machine and we know how to mold and weld. This is a place where people are raised on those skills. There's a huge expertise throughout the Midwest, and I think that's what needs to be tapped into. We're not going to reinvent factories where there's tens of thousands of people who go into these factories every day.
Wow.
I think you just have to write it off. And I think if you want to be forward-looking in some way, you have to admit, like if you look at the number of people in the U.S. economy who drive vehicles, I believe in my lifetime we will hit a place where we will not drive our cars. We will have autonomous vehicles. I even believe our grandkids are going to look at us and say, you can't believe this. My grandparents used to drive their own car. Can you believe how crazy that was?
This may be borderline apostasy in Detroit. I mean, even for me, driving cars is kind of fun.
I think the fun part of it is,
it's not always fun, but it's fun a lot of the time.
No, I just went through this funny thing. My son and I had built this electric go-kart a couple of years ago, and then this summer we took the guts of a drone and we transplanted it to make an autonomous go-kart. And the first thing everybody said to me is, why the heck would you make an autonomous go-kart? Isn't the whole point of a go-kart to drive it?
Right.
I said, absolutely, but what we started to do was we let the thing drive autonomously, and then you race against it and see if you could be faster.
I see. So that's what we're going to have people doing on the streets.
This is going to be so scary. I don't even want to talk to the mayor about this.
Yeah.
Right now, the mayor of Berkeley doesn't even like me driving the go-kart down the street.
Well, I do think sometimes when I spent some time in the country outside of New York, and all these people in their F-150, Fords, big pickups, how are they? Those people do not want to get out from behind the wheel. They love driving that powerful monster, right? And I don't think they're going to all get into a Tesla-ized pickup truck.
But think of cruise control. It's not saying you have to do this. I think what we're going to find out is that there are times when, just as we now all do parallel processing, we sit on our phone, we do our email, we talk on the phone. I think people are going to get in their car. I mean, if you talk to some of the folks who work at Google and drive their car, who have now driven autonomous vehicles for a long time, they get in the car and they start going to work. They take out their laptop and they do email.
Yeah, really, yeah.
It's one of these choices. I'm not trying to say this is the way the world has to work, but you're going to give people these options. And I think we're mistaken if we want to try to figure out how to kind of put the genie back in the bottle and say, we're not going to have autonomous vehicles, the factories, we're going to try to make full employment. We'll end up with some of the jobs that they have in places like Japan, where you go, what is that job? This is a made up job, 17 people on the train platform to watch, just so it's a full employment. I think that's
we
like
don't want that.
I think that's
But we do want employment.
We want good employment. I think it's the saddest state of affairs to make, jobs just for the sake of having jobs.
Yeah, I mean, and there's great stuff like just this week, the federal government basically said they're going to require all cars, or no, actually it was the auto industry got together and said pretty much all cars are going to have collision avoidance systems that automatically apply the brakes, to help people avoid killing themselves.
And I look at it and say,
so there's a lot of movement.
I think it will be demonstrable
on the good side.
It will be demonstrable that the computer is better at driving cars than we are.
Okay, since we're on
despite all of
cars-
us who love being behind our F-150.
Since we're on cars and we're in Detroit, how do you look, and you're a manufacturing thinker, where do you see the future of the auto industry? Is Tesla going to take over? I just saw today that Apple has over 1,000 employees on their auto thing, and they hired the CEO of Hyundai America yesterday, so Apple's clearly pushing forward. Is it Apple or Tesla going to be the next Ford or GM?
Well, you're talking about all my best customers, so this is going to get awkward.
You mean all four of them? Yeah.
No, there's about 20 worldwide.
Yeah. All automakers are giant customers of yours.
Yeah.
Yeah.
You know what I think the interesting thing is, so if we just look broadly at manufacturing, if I go back 10 years, the question that manufacturers used to talk to us about as the tool makers was all about quality. It was Six Sigma, how do I get good quality? Today, quality is assumed to be in every automobile, but every product. The questions that manufacturers are asking today are really two things. One is, how do I get this kind of intangible that many would label innovation? And what I translate to after hearing this conversation many times is, how do I make a product better than my competitors, and if really lucky, in a sustainable way? So what's my sustainable competitive advantage over my competitors? And the second thing they're concerned with is, how do I get that product to market more quickly? So I have this great idea of a thing called a minivan or a whatever. Right now it takes me 3 or 4 years before I can bring that to market. So in 4 years, lots of things change. Those are the things that manufacturers are dealing with. I think the most interesting thing about Tesla in some ways is, despite the hundreds of millions of dollars of R&D in Germany and Detroit and other places, it took an outsider to throw off the industry. I remember 3 or 4 years ago, I was at a unnamed German manufacturer of automobiles, and we had this interesting conversation. I said, around me, and I live in Berkeley and work in San Francisco, Teslas are everywhere. They're starting. You go to a parking lot, and other than Prius, there's Teslas, and that looks like the future. And in a very dramatic way, they kind of told me that this whole thing about electric cars is very Californian. Nobody wants an electric car. And you're wondering how industries miss these trends. They have people they hire to do this. They have R&D labs. They spend hundreds of millions, and they're going. And I said, so why do you think it's California? As a matter of fact, it seems kind of the opposite. You guys seem to live in cities with limited road space, commute 10, 20, 30 miles each way. It seems perfect for electric vehicles. It doesn't do a great weekend drive for the Autobahn, but other than that, electric vehicle, no, this is California, it'll never take over. Are you guys building an electric? No, we're not building an electric car. We have no interest. And so you look at this and you go, there's a lot of talk about how industries get disrupted, and there's a sense that they come out of nowhere. But my observation after years of doing this is that disruption comes really slowly, and that you see the thing, like a tidal wave in the distance, and for whatever reason, economic or otherwise, you choose to put your head in the sand.
Well, do you think the future of autos is going to be even newer Teslas, like startups that are, I know, you live in startup land, and this is startup land too. Is that going to be where we're going to see car makers?
But I would not,
companies we
I would
thinking
not,
about
I would not underestimate the power of the entrenched automakers.
Except the one you visited in Germany, but maybe even they probably have an electric car by now.
I think they'll eventually get it.
Even now, they'll
come around. And I think the thing is, people forget that the design of an automobile is one of the things, but the sale, marketing, production of that, you go to, for example, we get all amazed by the Tesla factory. And there are factories in Germany that are producing 10,000 cars a day with a handful of robots. I mean, the scale at which the big auto companies do this and do it very well is something to marvel at. And if you look, I was reading, I think
it's ironic. You'd think if they understood the robotics in their factories, they'd understand the also,
exactly.
Right?
Yeah. But I was reading the newspaper this morning, and just the difficulty that Tesla is having in scaling this. So I think they've done an absolutely wonderful job of giving a jolt to the industry.
Yeah.
But just as in every industry we've watched, even in IT, I would not write off the people who are already there and have a lot of the other things needed.
Let's get the house lights up, because I want to hear people who have comments or questions for Carl, but I have a question for you as we're moving in that direction. Software, which is what you do, is a transformative phenomenon societally. And you had an interesting way of describing that when we were talking on the phone, about, shall I prompt you about knowledge and how, the sort of leveling quality that software has. Can
Yeah.
you just talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, I mean, this goes back to my slightly dystopian view of the future, which is, it's mixed. So one thing that's wonderful is that software done well can embed lots of knowledge and can enable people to do things that are possible. So the thing that I think is most interesting going on in manufacturing today is the idea that we've been able to embed this knowledge. We can use microprocessors for the design, we can use microprocessors for the manufacturing, and we can make the machinist anywhere in the world as good as anywhere else.
With software that's instantiated the state-of-the-art knowledge and capability. Yeah.
Exactly.
And they could use that in literally any distant corner.
Right, you could be, and I think one of the interesting things that I think that's going on right now is the reversal of some of the things that made the Industrial Revolution. The Industrial Revolution was based on we're going to make lots of something, and by making lots of it, we will make it well, and we will make it cheaply. We will be able to lower the cost by raising the volume. Now, all of a sudden, you do not need to make things in huge volume to have those kind of economies of scale. And one of the enablers of that is that we have software that embeds this knowledge. And the other thing, and it's taken the form in people's minds of 3D printing, but if you look more generically, most manufacturing is done with computers today.
Yeah.
So sometimes it's in the form of a robot, sometimes it's in a 3D printer, a CNC machine, a laser cutter. All of this is really brought about by the microprocessor. And I think it's this thing that all of a sudden now what reverses that trend of the Industrial Revolution is I can make really high quality things in small quantities at reasonably affordable prices. And that's different. And that's where I think this is an incredible opportunity for people to create businesses.
And software is a fundamental enabler.
Yes. Software is fundamental, and the hardware is changing, and you have this nice coming together where you have access to markets, things, access to funding, and access to knowledge.
Yeah.
I was visiting a handful of startups yesterday in Detroit, and everyone is doing half their business online. Many of them were funded by things like Kickstarter. So by having crowdfunding, access to information about it, access to their market, reasonably priced software and hardware that allows them to compete with larger scale manufacturers, that's where you have real opportunity. And I'd much rather see people pursuing their passions and creating businesses around the things they love than trying to fill up factories with more people. And if and to get, further down that line, I still think one of the biggest things we need to do is reform the American education system, where if you really look at the history of it, it was to take an agrarian population and make us all suitable, to tame us so we could work in the factory. And so we're educating people in some ways for a future that doesn't exist anymore. And I think that's a real crime that we're, perpetrating on our children. The future is going to be in taking their knowledge and creativity and passion and turning it into interesting things, not for us to stand there all day, and turn the same screw 10,000 times.
Yeah, that's a great point. Who has a comment or a question? Okay, I'll get you unless somebody else has something. Okay, somebody in the back, and then we'll get to you. Wait for the mic. Okay, there you go. And identify yourself, please.
I'm Nima from Idea Market in California. So I have a Volt, but if it wasn't for the carpool stickers and the tax credits, would they be selling it even in California? Because ultimately, I think the CEO of Fiat's famously said, please don't buy the electric Fiats. We're losing like $6,000 on each of them. So my question is, you say in California, but they're still not able to sell these cars even with these incentives. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I think, in many of the places, we're at some transition period where the pricing is getting even. Electric cars and gas cars are there. If you look at solar in California versus, other means of generating power, we're getting at the break-even point. In some cases, we've exceeded it, and there are some built-in things in the system that are retarding the growth of it, but I think we will get there. Often don't say this too publicly because of all the car companies, but I was recently reading this thing that came from Argonne National Labs, and it was a white paper that basically said the embedded energy cost of making an automobile exceeds the lifetime energy of the fuel.
Wow.
And so if you really want to do anything really good for the environment, it's actually not buying a Volt or a Prius. It's actually driving your car longer or,
Right.
or finding ways that that car gets more use per time around. So
That's a great
things like sharing automobiles. So now,
That might not be the greatest for the economy.
it's not the greatest for the economy.
Real quick question, and then we're going to wrap.
Thank you very much. Andrew Humphrey, WDIV Detroit, and Tech Time with Andrew Humphrey. Facebook yesterday announced that they're making a significant investment in 360-degree spherical views and virtual reality. What's what's your take on that sort of space? Virtual reality, 360-degree view, and also getting more directly into the consumer market.
Thanks. Good.
So my slightly cynical view when Facebook started with Oculus was, why did the company that started the social networking thing buy the most antisocial device on the planet? That
is slightly cynical.
It's slightly cynical. What I really think is I am less enthused about virtual reality and going into a made-up space because I think there's all kinds of limitations. I'm much more interested in the class of applications called augmented reality, where we take things that already exist in the world and we supplement them with information that's in the computer. So in the context of cities, if I'm walking down and I have a device on, so you watch them digging up the streets, the call before you dig is immediate. I can walk and I can see the infrastructure underneath as I'm walking. You can think of thousands of applications. And I think this augmented reality set of applications will be the thing that in many ways is much more interesting than virtual reality.
That's great. You've said some fantastic things. And by the way, Mark Zuckerberg, I think, more or less thinks that too. It's just the technology that they're using in Oculus for virtual is going to burst also.
Yeah, and by the way, the Oculus is
very similar.
It's a wonderful, it's actually a great device. It's a great technical achievement. They've actually gotten rid of a lot of the problems with these kinds of devices.
Not yet. Not all of them.
Not all. But they're on their way. Thank you.
Yeah, there's a bunch of amazing companies. But you are doing so many great things, and thank you again for the reception.
Thank you very much,
last night.
David.
Really good, Carl. Really appreciate it.